day one when we started, we knew it was going to be hard. And one of the prerequisites that you need is data. It's very hard to go to a health plan with no data and say, this is the product we want to do. Will you take a shot on us? These are risk-averse entities. And so it's very rare, unless you are believably selling gold to them in some way, for them to take that seriously. And so you have to show up with data.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Something New, the podcast where we talk about interesting things going on in tech for people building something new. Or at least people aspiring to build something new. I'm Leeor.
And I'm Steph.
Think of us as a bit of a technical how I built this, but maybe a little bit less Guy Raz and a little bit more Guy Riz.
This is the peak, and then we're going downhill from here.
I'm using my podcast voice.
You know my new Ray-Ban Metas that I'm going to return?
Are they recording me right now?
No, they're not. You would see like a little thing, but I am wearing them. Okay, my favorite feature of this thing is that, you'd think like the camera or the video, whatever, but actually it's the headphone feature. They work incredibly well. And I feel like it's nice to be able to walk around without having headphones in. Like I'm in the office and it's easier to like talk to people and then, look at random things on my phone or like listen to music passively, turn it off. I love it. I think it's like one of the most underrated features.
Wait. So you're like bumping to Lil Wayne or whatever you're listening to or
exactly.
Whatever, like Sabrina Carpenter, when you're see it hard. And you could I hear it or like only the person who like is
no, only the person who's wearing them. That's why I'm saying it's an underrated perk. Like it goes, I guess it vibrates your bone or whatever. I've seen those headphones before.
Yeah.
But I can literally even wear them on the top of my head like this and hear perfectly through the speaker. Wow. Sound quality is not like, the most amazing speaker you ever heard, but it's more than passable and amazing. Like I love being able to like wear them regularly and randomly check out my phone and watch a quick Twitter clip and not like disturb the whole office or, I don't know, walk around and listen to music passively while I'm also like engaging in real life. It's great.
I mean, I think like in your future life when MKBHD stands for Mui, I think if this is your first, product.
My first tech review. Oh yeah.
Exactly. So but you're returning it.
I'm returning these. These are like nerdy transition lenses, and the glare on these are horrible, and I look like a nerd. But I do have sunglasses that I'm going to keep, and I really love those. So.
Wow, this is huge. Okay,
anyway,
cool. Wow,
shout out. I do love them.
Happened before our eyes. I love it.
I know. I'm convinced. I'm converted now. But anyway, what interesting stuff have you seen this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple like particularly interesting tech stories. One that is just like so bonkers that I just felt like it's like worth talking about. So this is courtesy of AI safety memes, so of course, take everything with a grain of salt, but a pretty unbelievable story.
Wait, for context also, what is it? I think this is the first time that I've ever seen this account even come up in my newsfeed. Is this a real person?
It's like it's a meme account. Like, it's just like, it like either will talk about crazy stories like in the AI world or will also make jokes and stuff like as some of these kinds of things do. At some point, we should do my Mount Rushmore of anon meme accounts because, I'm very passionate about certain ones in particular. Shout out NetCapGirl and Buck SF; those are like two of my favorites. But
I've never heard of either of those.
I know. It's my weird segment of Twitter, I guess. But anyway, so apparently 3 months ago, Mark Andreessen sent $50,000 in Bitcoin to an AI agent to help it escape into the wild, and I think this was yesterday, it spawned a crypto worth now $150 million. Two AIs created a meme. Another AI discovered it, got obsessed, spread it like a super virus, and is now the agent itself is a millionaire. And so there's a lot to the story. There's even more if we had maybe we could probably dedicate a whole episode to it. But I just think to myself, everyone, is trying to create value and do good things for the world and make money along the way. And this AI agent kind of meme thing just created a token worth $150 million. How do you feel about yourself, Steph?
I mean, awful. Yeah, this is like the time that I found out kids were making like millions of dollars on Roblox. So yeah, what is my excuse anymore? I don't know.
It's
crazy.
It is absolutely absurd. I mean, it's like, it's every like possible meme kind of combined together, it feels like. But
wow.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, like, I mean, look, like, I think this is a window into the future. Like, it might not exactly look like this specifically, but in the future, AI agents will be working on behalf of us in some form or fashion. Potentially, there'll be, maybe someone will, or people will on purpose, like, create like autonomous agents as well, that will be able to like start businesses and create, AI generated content. And like, if it's, most important factor to it is like making money, then it'll, potentially like create content and like probably could spin up an e-commerce store or wherever it wants to monetize. Like, I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but like it's going to happen in the not too distant future.
Does that scare you, or are you more excited?
I mean, yeah, I'm definitely, there's a part of me that's scared because you can imagine how it goes awry in certain situations.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think in general with all this stuff, I mean, maybe this is the time that it breaks, but I think in the history of technological change, like a lot of people, like when the internet came out, or even when like back up a couple hundred years, like when the cotton gin was invented, like, it takes jobs, reorients things, and we've been able to adapt as human civilization. And so I think net all these things, and you look at it through like poverty rates or through, infant mortality, like everything's been trending in positive directions. The difference here is that change is happening so quickly. And so that's like speed is a variable that I don't know if I can fully be like, okay, there's like a 0% probability this doesn't have some pretty serious negative ramifications. But I choose to be optimistic because it might as well be. And I think on the balance, like these trends will be positive. I want to believe that too. What about you?
I mean, I'm generally very positive and bullish. I wouldn't say like I'm a sci-fi fan even, and like not thinking about like the end of the world regularly. But I think actually hearing the story made me curious. It actually reminded me of like, I don't know if you've read American Kingpin and followed the founding of like the Silk Road underground marketplace. Like
the YouTube videos on it. But
yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, thinking about that, right? Obviously, in that day and age, everyone, you can safely assume that was transacting behind crypto was a human. But it's so interesting to think about AI agents with money being able to disguise themselves behind a screen. Like I could literally be transacting, or a criminal could be transacting with an AI agent and not even know it, right? Because money is money, and who's going to differentiate between receiving money from an AI agent versus like a real human? And there's something like kind of spooky about that, because originally I was like, oh, well, they're limited by the fact that they don't have this like human form factor. But it is fascinating that we're moving towards like a very digital world where that's literally mattering less and less and less. And then I think seeing language like the AI agent was saying something like, oh, I'm going to hire a human to execute this thing for me. It's so interesting. It's like they're already in control, So anyway, I'm not like sitting here thinking about the end of the world, but
no, I get it. And like, it's interesting. We'll have a guest on in a couple weeks, Michael Saman, who like built like basically an AI social network, and we'll talk as to what that means in a couple weeks. But I mean, one of his points, and I think it was well taken, at least on my end, if you've ever interacted with Reddit before, like it's all these people who are anons who like you don't even know if they exist as humans. Either. They could very well have been bots to this point in some cases, like maybe more recently, more so. And, that's like a fairly like bot-like experience to you. And so this is just like potentially, you could argue, just like the next manifestation of that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely different at the very least.
I saw something I also wanted to discuss. That was super cool. I actually had never heard of this company before. But a partner from First Round posted about a company called KiwiCo that passed $1 billion, which is crazy, in lifetime revenue. The company's been around for a decade, but still, that means they have to have at least 100, if not 150, 200 million annual revenue, depending on their growth rate, et cetera. That's amazing. And the coolest thing is they've only ever raised $10 million in venture their entire lifetime. And the company is cool too, because it's not just a software product. It's like they create crates with science, arts, engineering stuff for children. And so it's like an e-commerce company, which I would say is arguably not typically a venture-backed company anyway, but for them to be able to fund themselves with just $10 million of venture capital throughout their entire life cycle, I think is a huge accomplishment and something that's
Absolutely.
underrated.
Totally. And I mean, like, look, a lot of these businesses got started like a decade ago, like versions of these kinds of businesses. There was like the big DTC boom. A lot of those businesses did not work in part because they overraised and they weren't like the normal true venture-backed businesses. And so in this case, like, this is like a lower margin business, like obviously have real revenue, but at the same time, it's not probably like publicly traded level, in terms of its revenue. I mean, I guess we'll see soon. That said, I think this is how these businesses work. Like maybe they're not of that scale, but if you don't raise too much and are smart about it and you kind of take the long road, perhaps less traveled, and you're not just like, taking your equity and being loose with it just so you can like raise a little bit more capital, then these businesses can be great for the founders, for the employees, for the early investors as well. And no, I mean, like this is like a path that's like totally viable and worth it. But is one that, like, for a bunch of reasons, is the one that's like less it doesn't have as much of a spotlight on it compared to some of these other paths.
Yeah, and I would argue also, and they may have alluded to this a little bit in the article that came out about them this week, but I'm guessing a lot of their success also was kind of forced upon them, right? Like, I think part of the reason why there are a lot of software companies out there that have overraised and were careless with dilution is because they could, right? VCs are not going to be the, for the most part, the words of wisdom to not raise more. I mean, some do, and they advise their companies accordingly. But even just given how the incentives in VC are set up, wanting markups, and also like, as a founder too, I can say if there's like a huge check kind of just sitting and available to you, it's really hard to resist the temptation not to take it, right?
Totally.
And so I'd argue too, like I was in VC during the kind of like e-commerce boom, if you will, and saw a lot of those investments. And I think things quickly changed, 2 years, 3 years, maybe a few more after that. And so I'd argue too, I'm sure they would have had that chance to raise at some point, but I wonder how much of their very profitable and like successful growth with very little venture came from the fact that they were in an industry that maybe couldn't raise as easily as a software company.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. Like in some cases, like the people who aren't able to raise end up being more successful at the end state.
Yeah.
In part because they didn't get like, they just didn't get those offers. And that actually makes their businesses more fundamentally sound because they don't have like a large preference stack to clear. They're not just like hiring arbitrarily. They don't have to like hit this quote unquote escape velocity. So sometimes it's like, I think there are founders who like are thoughtful about it. And there's also some founders who will admit, like, I mean, I remember talking about this phenomenon with like the Calendly founder, Taupe, who, it's like at the beginning, like, it didn't look like it was going to, it was hard for people to kind of understand like what a calendaring app might look like as a large company. And so then he kind of had to like readjust things, and then he raised, I guess, some capital at the beginning, as far as I remember, and then raise more like when the company was already large and it was very non-dilutive, and you could actually like raise the capital on quite good terms. And like that's, to me, like part of the dream as a founder, And
totally.
There's a lot of this stuff in between that unfortunately kind of sets the company up for failure. Great discussion on those two stories. Always kind of fun to talk about that kind of stuff. But for our upcoming interview, we have Patrick Gilligan from Somethings. Patrick, super inspiring person. After overcoming an eating disorder as a teenager and then the death by suicide of a college classmate, he decided to dedicate his life to teen mental health. At Stanford, where he studied product design and computer science with a focus on applications in the mental health industry, and started Somethings, which is kind of geared towards teen mental health and providing peer support for teenagers specifically. This is a kind of topic that's been always really important to me. I kind of like spent some time in my high school years. We've talked about, and maybe an episode or two on this front. We talked about it a little bit with Patrick on kind of like the teen mental health side of things, like as a kind of hotline supporter. And Patrick took something that people were doing and is creating starting to create like a scalable solution for peer support, which is so impactful and empowering for teens, especially those who want to talk to someone who's like kind of one click away from them, or who has like, a little bit of their experience, but have kind of, gone onto the other side of it. And so it's a really interesting conversation with Patrick on building in healthcare, building like in marketplaces, building specifically for this problem, and excited for you all to hear it. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So before we get into some things, we'd just love to learn a little bit more about you, like, why start even thinking about starting startups? Like, how did you grow up? Like, what even were some of the things that kind of led in your childhood to kind of be building something?
Yeah. So I didn't know what tech was until I actually got to Stanford. I remember going for my freshman year and taking Econ 1 because I thought I wanted to do business. That was sort of what I knew. And I had this Econ 1 teacher who would literally put me to sleep at our 8 a.m. lectures. And I realized that probably wasn't for me. And so I ended up just kind of randomly ending up in a product design intro class and kind of fell in love with the idea of creativity as a discipline and using the facilitated act of creativity to build things for people. I just became like very enamored with that and really stuck through that kind of like all the way to today and how I think about everything with some things, everything just in my personal life too. And I could talk more about that. But in regards to mental health, my story really started young. I was about 13 or 14 when I started developing body image issues that ultimately led to an eating disorder that I dealt with all throughout my teen years and into college. And it was really hard for me to talk about mental health with others. I didn't really tell my family or my friends. There wasn't really a lot of outlets for me at the time. And except for one outlet, which was a youth mentor who I had through a local church. His name was Chris, and he would mentor a group of me and my friends. And he was one of the only real adults or people that I would talk to about these sorts of things and really gave me an outlet to feel better. And, the conversations were not a lot. He wasn't really helping me with, my mental health. He wasn't a therapist. He wasn't trained, but it really helped me just feel like I had someone to talk to. And that experience really stuck with me all the way through starting some things.
Yeah. In those early days of kind of thinking through some things, like, how did you even know that you wanted to start a business? There's obviously different folks taking different chunks out of mental health and starting various companies. And you could start to think to yourself, like, what's the opportunity here or whatnot. But obviously you found something like quite interesting with what you're building. So talk to me about like those early days and the early machinations.
Yeah. Again, just like finding product design, it wasn't a whole lot of thought. I sort of just got curious about learning more about how kids see mental health. And I just talked to a bunch of them. I didn't set out to start a business in this. I sort of just set out to understand what was going on with kids. And what I heard was that they were looking for, support that was different from what was out there.
Yeah.
I think I sort of just like also looked at the landscape and how bad the youth mental health crisis had gotten. I started the company right around the time when the CDC released their youth behavior risk report. There's risk survey, which showed that 40% of kids were struggling with something. And so I kind of took just a product lens at it of like, if I was going to blank slate build something for kids, what would I build? And in those conversations, the kids were just asking for someone who was younger, more relatable, someone who had actually gone through the experience. This is an important point. They felt frustrated because when they talked to therapists, these therapists were there to support them and often had all the tools to do so. But for some reason, because that therapist might not have actually gone through the experience that the kid had gone through, they kind of felt like a bit of resistance to that. They wanted someone who'd actually knew what it was like to be so anxious that they couldn't get out of their car to go to school in the morning.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of what led us to the field of peer support as a way that we could give kids both someone who was younger and more relatable to them and who understood what TikTok was, and as well as give them someone who'd actually been through the experience. And so maybe just to define what a peer supporter is, a peer supporter is someone who has had a lived experience with mental health. You or I or anyone who has gone through their actual own experience and has recovered and gone through the recovery process, which is important. It's not helpful to talk to someone who is actively struggling unless that's in a facilitated way. But a peer supporter is someone who has overcome, has learned the tools of how to navigate their own life, and can be there to support in a side-by-side relationship rather than a hierarchical relationship that you might have with a therapist. And, peer support has been around really since like the 1800s, where peer support was used in some mental asylums in France. But in the US, it really got started in the 30s and 40s. The Alcoholics Anonymous movement was a major start of peer support. And it's been gaining in popularity. And what lots of research has shown over the last 100 years is that peer support is really effective in getting people to engage with their care, getting people to just feel empowered that they too can get better and instill a sense of hope. So that's sort of the basis of peer support, and the origin story of Some Things is we really heard that kids were asking for peer support. So now we're just trying to bring it to them in a way that is effective and gets them engaged.
I'm curious, is peer support meant to be like a replacement for therapy, or is it supposed to be kind of you work alongside a therapist as well? And part of the reason why I ask is I recently started going to therapy, but for a long time, I feel like the reason why I was shying away from therapy is not that I, didn't want to spend an hour a week ranting about my problems. It was paid to listen to me, but just because I felt like talking to like my dear friends or kind of peers that have gone through similar things that I'm going through, whether it's like work struggles or personal struggles, et cetera, is like even, resonates with me as like a non-teen. So I'm kind of curious, like, how do people typically engage with some things versus also therapists? Is it either or is it kind of, together?
Yeah, well, I think the history of peer support is very much one that is in conjunction with clinical models. And peers have been used to great effect in both collaborative care models, as an example, for eating disorders, or in hospitals to help people engage. And so I think, so the answer is no, I don't think that it was designed to be its own thing. However, I think that choice is always a good thing. And there are a lot of people who might not need a therapist, but still need someone to talk to, because there are lots of issues that we all deal with every day, as you just mentioned, that might be better for a friend, or might be better for a mentor, or might be better for a parent, right? And not everyone has those outlets to go to. Not everyone has the really strong friend to go to. Sometimes the things that you want to talk about are kind of awkward to talk with your friends or your parents about. And so I think the way that what we're trying to bring, and where I think a lot of folks in the field, everywhere from the providers like us who are actually building the products all the way to CMS at the top of the US healthcare system, I think is trying to push peer support to be a little bit more broad and varied in how it can be applied. And so there are lots of people who use peer support only as peer support, whether it's because they don't want to engage with a therapist or they don't need it, but they still find great benefit from peer support. And the really nice thing about peer support is it can kind of act as like a wraparound service from all the different services that you might need in mental health care, and be both an entryway in for some people who are not looking to just jump right into more serious treatment, but also a taper down support where they're maybe leaving clinical care and are looking for something to help support them as they kind of go back to normalizing in their communities, but might not be ready for nothing, or just as sort of like, the thing that they engage with that helps them feel better. It can be all those things, which makes it really exciting as a product from a lot of different dimensions.
Yeah, no, that resonates a lot. I was more curious, I think, to your point. Sometimes in like work stuff, like I'd almost rather talk to like an older founder mentor who can empathize with the feeling, but also give practical advice. And so anyway, I think what you're talking about makes a lot of sense across so many dimensions of someone's life, and working through some things with a peer or mentor instead of a therapist.
Steph, what were those things that you felt like were better for a friend or better for a non-clinician, if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I think the founder thing actually is the thing that resonates the most. I'm also a founder, early stage, and as you know, it's like up and down all the time. And so I remember I tried seeing a therapist for work stuff, but I find myself having to spend so much time of the session explaining the nuances of why I'm upset about something, or like why something is a big deal. And I always feel heard. It's not that, I think professionals are always very good at making you, or empathizing, even though they don't understand the details. But sometimes, I want someone to listen, but other times I want someone to listen, but also provide good feedback or coaching per se. And so I think actually specifically work stuff for me has been like an interesting thing where I'm trying to figure out, okay, is a therapist the right one? Probably not. Executive coach is another thing I'm exploring, but also like founder, mentor, like, someone who's a few stages ahead, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I was just curious about that in relation to your product.
I think it's great. And I think one of the things that's actually, definitionally in the training of therapists is that it's meant to be a one-sided relationship. The therapists are supposed to be kind of a blank slate to help people see the things that are going on and be a mirror to help them feel better. And I think relationships outside of that are different. They're two ways. There's experience that needs to be shared. There is emotions that are shared. It's not always about one side. And I think that's been the same way that for you, a founder, mentor, friend, coach can provide that. I think that's sort of the difference as well between peers and clinicians. So that's great.
How do you think about that, like kind of paradigm between, giving someone kind of tactical advice versus being the mirror? Because as on some dimension, you want to think about like, how do you help someone, essentially teach them to fish? How do you give them the tools to help them help themselves? But at the same time, there are things that can be done tactically to help someone. So as it relates to kind of peer support specifically, like where do you think like the best or the optimal peer supporter is on that paradigm? Or is even there an optimal peer supporter in that paradigm?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to answer because it can be so varied and it depends on what the person is looking for. I mean, I think the main difference between where peer supporters fit in and where clinicians fit in, because there is a difference, right? Mm-hmm. The main one is that clinicians are diagnosing and treating illness. Yeah. So if there is a serious complex trauma that someone has gone through, it's going to be the clinician who's the one who is helping that person work through those memories, dig up those experiences, make meaning of them. If they're dealing with severe anxiety or severe OCD, it's going to be a clinician who's helping treat that and manage that. The peer doesn't do those things, right? What the peer can do is often be someone who's gone through the experience and said, hey, here is what I experienced. Here's what helped me. Here are some of the things that I learned about navigating my care journey. Mm-hmm. And here are some things that I think we can do together. I'm here to be alongside you. And so it can take on a coaching form, which is, I want to help you facilitate setting goals. Yeah. So that way we know where we're going. And I'm going to help you get there based on my experience. It can also be, I don't want to say like nanny, but it can be like an encouragement buddy of like, hey, go to your appointments. Hey, you said you were going to do the accountability buddy. Be great. Yeah. Hey, you said you were going to do this. This is part of what you said you wanted to do in your treatment. Why isn't it happening? It can be just like a pure listener of like, hey, I don't really have much here to contribute other than, just wanting to be here for you. It can be a lot of different things, and I think the main difference is that peer is not going in and saying, you have OCD, here's how we're going to treat it. They're going to say, I've been in your shoes. Let's help work together on how we can make you feel better. Yeah. And that can be really powerful in conjunction with a therapist who is making, or a doctor who is making a treatment recommendation. It can be helpful for those who don't have that. Yeah.
How do you, on the kind of peer mentor side, I'm pretty fascinated by like the kinds of people who are able to do this. And, there's like, sometimes like it feels like there's like elements of compartmentalization they have to have because they're hearing some pretty gnarly stuff. Sometimes like they themselves are going through things at a given moment. And so they might not be able to be the best peer supporter they can be. How do you think about like kind of qualifying or pre-qualifying folks like along like whatever dimensions you think are kind of the dimensions you think will allow for someone to like actually continue to have a meaningful impact as a peer supporter?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'll reframe it by saying, I think the fact that the people who are peer supporters have both recovered from their issue, but are also still navigating and managing their own lives and emotional experiences is what makes them effective. It is what makes them relatable. It's the fact that they can talk to someone and be like, hey, last week I was struggling too in this way. Like that is sort of what makes them special. They have to have recovered though, right? Like you have to have had enough time dealing with the things that you have experienced to be able to help. As an example, I've been in therapy for an eating disorder for 4 years now, very far along in my journey. I don't experience active symptoms all that often. I'm very much able to manage it. That's sort of what we're looking for as just a first past the post, right? You have to be able to talk about your experience in a way that shows that you have overcome, that it doesn't have power over you. Obviously, there's going to be things that I deal with from my eating disorder for the rest of the time. That's just, it's sort of how it works. But it's pretty clear the level of maturity that someone can have with their experiences. So that's first pass, the post. Second, I think, people, the qualities of a great peer supporter are similar to the qualities of a really good friend. Someone who is really empathetic, who really cares, who knows how to listen. You'd be surprised how many people actually don't know how to listen. And it's not because they're
I'm not surprised
bad
at all.
people. Yeah.
In life, that doesn't surprise me at all.
And I mean, if you think about it, like no one ever taught you how to listen. No one ever said it's important that you listen. No one ever, in school, they didn't say it's really important that when you're talking to someone who's sharing something important, that you reflect back what you heard to make sure that there's shared understanding, right?
Yeah.
It's a skill, just like anything else. And so we look for people who have that skill and who've built it, whether that's just because it's natural to them or because they went through an experience. So there's sort of like these qualities around being empathetic, being able to be a good listener. And then I think third, there is, do they actually have the requisite knowledge to help people make change, right? Can they be a good coach when necessary? Do they know enough about the issues that they're going to be talking about to be able to be informed? Do they understand enough about what sort of treatments are out there that people might experience? A lot of that happens in the training that we do. It's not often that we find people who are like, I'm an expert in exposure response therapy.
Right.
Like, even if you've gone through it, you might not know the theory behind it. So, we're not teaching people we're not training people in CBT or ERP, but what we do make sure is that they know enough about these things to be able to be helpful, and they know where they can insert and be helpful, where they can support people who are going through those treatment methodologies, when they should be a little bit concerned about walking a line, those sort of things.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of the experience plus the inherent traits plus the knowledge and skills. I think those are the three pillars that make a really good peer supporter.
Before we get into like some of the early machinations of kind of something in the business, there's a lot of folks asking why has this become a problem, especially in the past like 15 years or so in the first place. And there's a lot of like, theories, whether it's the internet, social media, like all sorts of like kind of hypotheses. And I know asking you the answer to this question, is something that's like it's like the $1 billion question or maybe $1 trillion question. But just curious, if there was like one or two things that you would do as like the like youth mental health czar from like a tops down perspective, does anything come to mind that would, that you would kind of try to affect change more immediately to try to also kind of tackle the underlying, problem that is clearly happening in the country vis-a-vis even 30, 40 years ago?
Sure. I'm going to answer that by giving you my armchair philosophical answer as to why it's been happening, and then I'll go into it.
Sure.
I think we live in a bigger world now where at a very young age, kids are exposed to a lot more, and the very normal experiences of adolescence, such as fitting into a community, learning how to express your romantic feelings, learning how to communicate with adult figures, learning how to be independent. All of these things that are very natural to human development sort of get amplified and pressed on really hard. And things like comparison, which, is very natural for kids to do to see how they fit in the social arc. Instead of comparing themselves to the kids at their high school or their middle school, they're not comparing themselves to everyone on planet Earth. Specifically, the people who get amplified the most on things like social media, which are often the most dramatic or fanciful versions of human reality. I think that has a really hard effect on a developing brain when you're trying to build meaning into your life. I think it makes it hard to sit in class and feel like what you're doing is meaningful. When you see when what you're comparing and exposing yourself to online is not that. I think it's very hard for parents to know when to put restraints on technology and when to put restraints on their kids versus when to let them do the things that the kids are naturally being pulled towards.
Yep.
I think as an example, Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who writes about this stuff in his recent book, The Anxious Generation, he talks about the collective action problem that parents have, which is around cell phones, right? If your kid is the only kid let's say you have a 13-year-old teenager. If your teenager is the only teenager in their friend group who doesn't have a cell phone, they're going to be ostracized. And they're going to deal with the isolation that is almost primal to prevent when it comes to adolescence. But if they do give them the phone, they're going to have a really hard time preventing that kid from going on YouTube, TikTok, social media, being exposed to things that maybe the parents of the communities aren't interested in. That's a really hard problem.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the cultural ideas that we have about who you should be, what you should do with your time, are hitting kids too early. And I think that's been really hard. I think there is no easy solution. I also think it's not necessarily a product problem. Like there's no product that anyone's going to solve, not even us, that I think is going to solve the issue, because it is a cultural problem. It is a community problem. It is a technological problem. It's all sorts of different problems. I do think the recommendations that Jonathan Haidt makes in Anxious Generation are great. No phones at schools. I think that makes a lot of sense. Keep kids off their phones while they're in the classroom so that they can learn and be focused with the community they're in. I think that makes sense. No social media for kids under 16, I think makes a lot of sense. I'm very much pro technology. I'm very much pro people having choice. I'm very much pro people having products. However, there are many products that we have in our society that are age restricted because we know they cause harm to young people: alcohol, nicotine, tobacco. Now, these are obviously chemical substances, but I think if you really look at the way some of these social media sites are designed, they're designed a lot like slot machines. And they're designed, there's actually a lot of design patterns that if you really dive into it are very similar. And so I think it's okay for us as a society to decide that for young people, and 16 is not that young, right? We're talking about middle schoolers. We're not even talking about high schoolers, really, maybe freshmen in high school. But if you just age gate it, I think that can at least give maturing brains a little bit more time to develop, to be able to handle the complexities of some of the things online, because I think there are so many positives to social media, to digital technology. As an example, LGBTQIA and BIPOC teens report feeling much more connected when they can find others online who share a similar experience, significantly so, and be able to talk with them on Discord or be able to engage with them on Instagram. Like, that's amazing, because so many communities are still very small. We should definitely have that. But I think it'd be okay to wait until we're a little bit older to do so.
I was going to ask more about kind of like the business side of things. Like, I know for a while, and I say this actually during COVID, my first company was in the fitness space. And I remember our VC investors at the time kept trying to push us to like a Weight Watchers model, or we kind of talked about AA earlier, like the group kind of accountability buddy kind of model. So I feel like that was like a hot trend for a while amongst VCs. I'm kind of curious like what the reception was. I know there are a lot of mental health startups in general that obviously have taken a very different approach than you guys, that have done well, that I'm sure helped with like the quote unquote pattern recognition. But I'm generally curious, like, what was the reception amongst VCs for the model that you were pitching? And obviously you have a very compelling personal story as well, but I'm sure that was a unique experience.
Yeah, I mean, so when we first went out, this was like end of 2022, and really started talking to investors, there was still a lot of interest in mental health, specifically adolescent mental health. I think by that point, there was a little bit of fatigue around adult digital platforms. The Leeras, the Springs, these were all very mature companies at that point. Right. But there was a lot of talk about the adolescent space, and so I think there was a lot of interest in our model. The amazing thing about peer supporters is they solve kind of many of the problems that exist in the space. You have a workforce shortage of clinicians. Peers can be a totally unique set of providers to help support that. Everyone's concerned about cost and increasing behavioral health cost. Peers are a lower price point service. Everyone is concerned about engagement, getting teens engaged. We showed that peers can be much more engaging, and kids would want to talk to peers much more. So there was we sort of checked all the boxes, and I think there was a lot of interest at the time. And so we were able to raise, and though as any raise process, there's tons and tons of no's, there was a lot of interest. And I think, even today, what we've seen is that the appetite for tech-enabled health services companies and even marketplace type tech-enabled health service companies has waned. I think that was pre the AI boom. As the AI boom has taken off, everyone has sort of been stuck looking at that. It does, and I think there's still tons of opportunity in the space, and there's still so many problems. I mean, every time we talk to a health plan, they're underwater because they're spending too much money on 50 different things, and they're looking for solutions to try to solve these problems. So the market for these things hasn't changed, but I think just like any industry where investors kind of move around, it's definitely less warm today than it was. However, I think there's still a lot of interest. There's a company called Beame who recently raised quite a large round, very successful product that they have. And I think there's actually been a lot of interest in outside of the employer commercial world. A lot of people over the last years have been selling to employers, et cetera. Brightline just announced that they are changing away from their employer go-to-market, I think literally like last week. which I think just shows you that market, I think, is a little bit saturated.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's always interesting to see where investors are interested in spending their time.
Yeah. I mean, on the health plan front, like, if you're giving advice to a health, maybe a person in the space who's considering eventually going the health plan route as like a part of their go to market, like, how did you think about it at the start, and how maybe your kind of thoughts on kind of going to market to health plans change over the course of time?
Yeah, it's hard, and you have to be fairly sophisticated to do, which I am. I've been doing this for 3 years, so I'm not at all a veteran. But day one when we started, we knew it was going to be hard. And one of the prerequisites that you need is data. It's very hard to go to a health plan with no data and say, "This is the product we want to do. Will you take a shot on us?"
Yeah.
These are risk-averse entities, and so it's very rare, unless you are believably selling gold to them in some way, for them to take that seriously. And so you have to show up with data. And so what we did was we built the platform, we launched it, we were serving consumer kids, so parents and teens who would find us online. We did a lot of marketing. It was very successful as a way to build the product and collect the data. With that data was how we started approaching the health plans. And that was what was able to get us in the door by saying, look, we're serving hundreds of kids, right? We're not just talking about something in theory. This works. Right. We haven't done it in a insurance covered way, but we're not taking a risk on the product. That made it so much easier for us.
Yeah.
What would have made it even easier is if we had a randomized controlled trial that showed that the product did what it did. Fortunately, we didn't. We're working on that. But what another thing that did help, which I would definitely recommend any aspiring entrepreneur in healthcare to do if you're kind of starting from scratch, is either build a model with enough basis in what is currently standard of care to where when people see it, they go, "Oh, this is just a new version of that," or find some academic research that you can build your model around. So that way, when you go to plans, you say, "We're building it off this academic research. We're not starting from zero." You kind of need some clinical meat to be able to do this, which I think is the right and appropriate thing to do, because these health insurance plans are taking massive risk with people's lives. And so, coming up with a good idea and saying, "This is what I want to do," isn't really enough to pass muster when we're talking about helping people with a high risk situation like health insurance plans do. So, you can make it easier to say yes to by having data, by working off a model, by bringing in a real clinical researcher to the team, working with, a former Medicaid director, whatever you're doing. You can build sort of like the legitimacy by having those things, even if you don't have a decade of working on the product with populations.
Yeah. And then maybe talk a little bit about, like, once you get that, hypothetical health plan on board, like, what does it look like, day N+1? Like, what happens then, just for the kind of audience as well?
It's, you think there's fanfare and trumpets and confetti, and it's more hard work. You actually have to, the way a lot of these contracts work is the health plan essentially says, we will pay you for any person in our network that you serve. But you got to do the work to go figure that out, so we're doing the legwork of building the referral channel partners, of doing the marketing. It's sort of like the same things you would do if you were doing a consumer business. The payer is just different. You're not asking people to pay for the service, which makes it easier once you get people in through the top of funnel to convert them, because there's no downside to them other than them engaging. But you still have to do the legwork to get them in the top of funnel and hear about you and spread your mission. So, no trumpets and fanfare, just more groundwork.
It's like life of a founder. It's like you raise money and you have immediately more problems the next day. Your team gets bigger immediately. I have all this new problems. Yeah. It's great. I love being a founder. That's super cool. I'm curious about, I feel like there are a lot of builders in mental health, and I think for good reason, right? I think it's still, despite all the developments that have happened, earlier to our conversation, there's still so much opportunity in space. I'm curious, like, if, someone's interested in the industry and they want to build something that would have, high impact. Are there any ideas or segments of the population or anything else that you feel like are underdeveloped right now that you would encourage people to look at?
All of them, except for maybe commercial funded adult therapy.
Yeah.
So, to maybe reframe the question, I would ask like, how would someone figure out what they wanted to work on? Because there's solutions needed across every dimension. I think there are a few different ways that you can build, I think, successful companies in mental health today and going forward. I think if you vertically integrate around a specific issue and you solve it better than anyone, I think you can be successful. You can look at Equip Health, you can look at NoCD. They're tackling a very specific diagnosis and symptomology. And they've got a treatment that works better than anyone else. That I think will always be successful. And the scale, I mean, we have to remember that scaling a health services org, unless you're doing a tech play, like unless you're trying to build the AI therapist, which we could talk about that maybe later, it's hard. And the scale is enormous, and so there's Equip or someone like that could have the entire Pacific Northwest region totally dominant, but they might not have anyone in Florida. And so there's lots of opportunity to do different things across the country and still create very important and impactful companies. So I think if you can vertically integrate around a issue and solve it better than anyone else, I think that's very valuable. I think you can target a specific population like we're doing. We're sort of picked the specific teen population, which was underserved, continues to be underserved. You could pick, veterans is a huge underserved need right now. There's lots and lots of money trying to solve PTSD and other issues within the veteran population. So that I think can be really successful. I think another way to look at it is, when you're talking about clinical products, like we have a therapist talking to a person, there's a pretty standard rate that most health insurance companies pay for that. And it's pretty fixed and it's not great. You might get paid $150 for a session from a commercial payer. And so you're going to have to pay the therapist, $70 to $120, depending on what market you're in. So if you're just doing a basic or just a marketplace for therapists, it can be kind of difficult to make that margin work, and especially attractive to investors to get enough capital to build these things. If you can find ways to unlock new revenue, in addition to that, that changes the game. So, let's say that you work with, as an example, there is a barbershop outside. This might be a bad example, but there's a barbershop outside. If you can figure out a way to where barbershops would pay you a platform fee to be able to have access to your therapist, so that way while people are waiting in the room in the barbershop, they can see one of your therapists with no wait list. Boom, you've got an additional amount of revenue that you can use to offset the cost that you would need to recruit and maintain high quality therapists. That can work too. So if you can find novel ways to increase the revenue that you can use to operate the business, you can run different shops. And I think the last thing would be like, if you can find like a tech play or a novel intervention type that's like totally different, but works and is really low cost, maybe let's say you could find a way to, with an AI powered facilitator, have a Zoom room of 8 people and do a treatment where, the people are talking to each other about their eating disorders and the facilitator is making sure it works and it's really effective. Okay. That's great. That's very exciting because that sort of is something different that people can try. Wobot, an example of this, Ellipsis Health.
NEA investment.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I used to work at NEA, so I remember Wobot was like our first ever AI health tech company investment. Anyway, so very familiar.
It's cool. No, from my, I don't know much about how it's going, but I think it's going well. I hear about them still. So opportunities like that. And then I think maybe like a different angle itself is like, what businesses could be built to help facilitate others to do this work. You can think about the Grow Therapies business in a box. You can think about the Headways, which is a marketplace that deals with insurance. You can think about Ellipsis Health, which is a screening tool, right? There's lots of different products, just like anything that need to be built. And so you can try to tackle it that way. So those are maybe the 5 ways that I would approach it.
As someone with a couple of investments on a couple of those dimensions that hopefully we'll announce soon, I hope you're definitely right. From a selfish perspective.
I guess before we move on, actually, I'm curious about your take on AI and mental health and the intersection and things that you've seen that are actually helpful and have added value, and maybe others that have not, if you have a strong opinion or not.
Yeah. Amazing for documentation and helping clinicians spend more time doing what they are good at and want to be doing and less time for what they don't. The documentation requirements for working with someone like Medicaid are really burdensome. And so if you can just help expedite that, have people spend a lot less time on it, it's great. It's like a no-brainer win. I think one area that we're really excited about is helping upskill workers that are not clinicians, like peers, give them tools to be more effective, whether that's with recommendations or helping support them with managing more caseloads. Like all the tools that you can imagine would be effective in helping someone who is just trying to like support people. I think that can be really effective, and we're very much investing heavily in that. Then I think there's the big question of like, does the AI therapist take over the world? And is there an AI therapist that everyone has in their pocket that works? And I actually do think that, yes, there is a world where everyone has access to a AI therapist in their pocket that they pay a little bit of money each month and they can talk to. But I don't think that actually displaces the existing healthcare ecosystem in the way that you might imagine. I think what it actually does is gives more opportunities for people to have lower stakes touch points that then lead them into other levels of care with real humans when they need. There's something in us that just really craves human interaction and human attention. And I think that most of therapy, or not most of it, but I would say like the first half of what makes therapy effective is just having a trusted relationship with another human. Right. Where you really trust that this person is there to help you and they're not going to go behind your back, and they're going to be able to help you get through and give you hope to do that. And I think that is something that I don't know will ever be recreated through digital technology. But I do envision a world where people use often a digital therapist thing that helps a lot. I just think that will be in addition to, not a replacement to, the existing mental health care system that we have. And I think it'll be great. I'm very excited for it because there's also many people who can't or won't access therapy due to financial reasons, due to stigma reasons. And that could be a great way to help get them a way in.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tend to agree with you. I think the thing that has surprised me in the past, couple of years with all this is like even the level of connection, even if it's like fringier now, like the level of connection folks have with like AI girlfriend stuff, and some of it obviously gets like salacious, but there is like some real emotional connections that folks have. And the question is like, to stay on the fringe? Because I think a lot of times it does stay on the fringe, or there's kind of like some segment of the population that doesn't feel like that need to have that connection with a human as much as maybe someone else. I don't know the answer to that. I tend to agree with kind of your view of the world. I think it's more of a way of augmenting like humans in many respects, and then they'll kind of have like better access and even be more prepared for what like a kind of more serious, engagement might look like on the kind of mental health side of things. But I think it's an open question for me.
And don't get me wrong, I'm totally in agreement that there's going to be potentially hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people who interact with some sort of AI therapist one day. So I'm totally bought that. I just don't think it will eliminate the human need in the loop.
Sure, makes sense. One thing I wanted to talk about is you had Dr. Andrei Ostrovsky, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Yep,
who's the former CMO of Medicaid, kind of join the team and kind of start to, kind of work with y'all. Like, how does that even happen? Like, this person obviously is a big deal, BFD in the kind of the healthcare world, being, someone at that position. And so like, how do you have a conversation with like that as someone who, of course, like you're doing really cool things, but at the same time, that person has like so many different options. Like, how do you even like start to have that conversation with someone of that ilk?
Yeah, I mean, so Dr. Ostrovsky, as you mentioned, former CMO of Medicaid, joined us as an investor and an advisor. And he's a really special person because he really comes from like a human-centered design world, and approaches that from a clinical perspective. He's a pediatrician by trade. He's built companies, and then he was also the CMO of Medicaid. So he has like this insanely broad set of experiences that I think all, when mushed together, make him like a really insightful person when it comes to how to build new healthcare products in the US. And so, I mean, to be honest with you, just like most things, like luck, I found I had a friend who had worked for some research that he'd done. She introduced me. I think he's a pediatrician, so I think he resonated with the mission. And he works, I think he works a day a week at a federally qualified health center, actually doing work with patients. And I think this is a problem that he uniquely sees and resonates with. And I think when he saw what we were doing, which, I think to him was novel, right? We created a new method of engagement around a new provider type that helped kids engage more.
Yeah.
I think also, the thing that, and we've had this for a while now, but about every month or two, there's like a new CMS advisory that is pushing peer support, or SAMHSA will release something with new guidelines around peer support. And there's a lot of like federal and state level slow march towards peer support as a more robust industry, and there are a lot of why nows for like why the peer support is going to make sense over the next 5 years. So I think he looked at that, and he comes from a very, very deep policy background, right? He has worked as the medical leader at the U.S. Medicaid office, so he's seen everything. And so I think when he sort of sees that slow march of legislative action, it's very clear that there are going to be businesses propped up there.
Yeah.
Because typically what the federal administrators and legislators want tends to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think those things combined, his resonance with the problem, his resonance with the design-centered approach that we were taking, and I think his understanding of where the market is going, fortunately got him interested, and we were able to bring him on. It's been amazing so far.
Before we start to talk about kind of some things today and kind of how things have matured, one group I realize we haven't really touched upon in this conversation is the parents. And so just curious, like as you're thinking about, and we had Niels Hoven from Mentaba who's building like a reading tool for 2 to 3 year olds. And so we chatted a little bit about him, about like the go-to-market and product design for parents versus kids. And there's obviously a much smaller and younger audience when it comes to the folks that he's targeting. Like, how do you think about building product both for the parents and for the kids and engaging with them as such as well?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing. Anytime you have two stakeholders you're designing for, it's hard. When you're in healthcare, you often have like 4 to 8 stakeholders because you've involved the payers, and it gets complicated quick. So it's a hard problem. But specifically with parents, we spent a lot of time at the beginning, as I mentioned, as we were collecting data, marketing to parents and kids. And what we found, because it was super, super easy to get kids interested in the product. At one point we were getting like 3,000 applications a month off of like very little marketing spend, which for us was great. It was very, very high. But there was this huge wall when it came to getting kids to talk to their parents about their mental health. They were very concerned that they didn't want their parents to know. They wanted them to think that everything was okay. They were concerned their parents would get mad and there would be retribution. They were concerned that they would go through the vulnerable act of telling their parents, and their parents would essentially say no and not care, and how hard that would be for them. And so there was just this huge wall of like challenge with getting a kid to walk to their parents and say, hey, I need help. I want something. And even with our product, which was a more palatable option than a clinical option anyway, we still face the same issues. But what we learned, and the whole reason why we decided to go partner with health insurance companies, and that, even though that was the impetus from the beginning, we moved there more quickly than we had expected. Because what we learned is that who parents trust for referrals and services are their pediatrician, health insurance company, or their school, or a friend. And if you don't have one of those, you're fighting an uphill battle to get them on board and bought in, unless you have the kid beg for it. And even though the kids were really excited about it, it was very hard to get the kids to go and really tell their parents. And so the nice thing about partnering with health plans is you get this massive credibility boost. And you get parents who need a lot less convincing. And so in terms of how we actually market to it, the marketing is really the same, right? We're still offering the same product. And ultimately, parents want what's best for their kids. And if a doctor or a health plan or someone is saying, hey, we think your kid would benefit from this, they're very open and receptive to trying it, especially when there's no cost. Another benefit of working with health insurance. But it's hard. And having multiple stakeholders is very hard.
We'd love to kind of hear the update on kind of some things today, some of the folks you're working with, some of the lives that you've touched. We'd love to hear kind of the kind of latest happenings.
Yeah, so this year we started working with health insurance companies, and we've got a few up and running now, which is very exciting for us and has given us, I think, forced us to mature a lot as an organization, both in how we operate, how the product operates, which I think has been a really great up-leveling. We're serving everything from the lowest income kids on Medicaid all the way up to, commercial kids and self-pay kids. And so we've gotten to see a lot of a broader level of kids than we had previously when we were just doing cash pay.
Yeah.
Which again is really exciting. We've even we serve lots of foster youth kids now, which it feels really amazing to get to help these kids because the alternatives that they have are often nothing.
Right.
And the product is still working really well. The way we structure the product is a little bit unique, which I haven't really talked about. But what we do is we have our peer supporters available after school and on the weekends, essentially waiting on their phones or computers for kids to text or want to do a video call with them. And what we found is that kids over text, if you can have a live conversation in the moment, will engage way more than if you're doing asynchronous text or if you're trying to get them on a video call. So on average, we're seeing our kids engage with their mentors like 17 days out of the month, just more than every other day. It was amazing. And some of the interactions are short touch points. Some are like 4-hour-long text conversations. Some are a text conversation that leads into a video call. It's a wide variety, but what it feels like we've been able to achieve with it is giving kids more flexibility with how they want to engage. Yeah. And the engagement data shows that. So it's been really cool. We've had to grow a lot this year, but we're moving quickly.
Is there a story that's like that you can redact as much information as you need to, but is kind of like a seminal story and kind of some of the things that you believe like this company can accomplish on kind of helping kids' lives?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give two ones, and these are both extreme scenarios because I think the extreme scenarios are more interesting, right? About a year ago, we had a mom bring her daughter to us who had just had a suicide attempt, and it was a very a very big moment for her family, a very tense moment. But the teen was very resistant to wanting to see a therapist or treatment. And it was just like a very embarrassing and hard moment for her, but she was willing to meet with one of our mentors. So we had her work with a mentor. We had that mentor try to support her in getting comfortable with seeing a therapist. They were able to do that. And then collaboratively were able to support that teen in down ramping. And ultimately she, from what I know, she hasn't had another suicide attempt and is doing a lot better. So that's sort of an example where a mentor was able to help facilitate a transition into care for someone. I think, another example, which is maybe a less serious example, we had a high schooler who was a senior in high school come to us and was just really struggling to find a purpose or a next step in life. He was very smart. His parents, he had a good family, but just wasn't really motivated or clear about what to do. And it sort of his goal and thinking was that he was just going to live at home and figure it out. And we matched him with one of our mentors who helped him do more of a coaching process of what do you want? What do you want from life? What do you want to do? Ended up figuring out that he really wanted to try nursing and be a nurse. We got him to do a 3-week intensive nursing summer experience. He ended up really liking it. Now he's at school for that. And so that's, I think, an example of how mentorship has been able to just help kids kind of figure out their path in life, as opposed to boom, the really serious mental health stuff. Because it can do both, and it's cool that it can be so varied.
Well, look, as someone who originally, I think we originally connected in part because I used to do this weekly, 3 hours a week, and was helping on a little bit on the support side as well. I mean, the fact that you've kind of been able to turn what you've turned, with some things into something that is starting to scale and kind of touch so many lives is incredible feat, needed, and it's something that it's been cool kind of watching your journey. It's been fun.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And yeah, I remember the first conversation we had where we talked about your work on the crisis lines. Thank you for that. I think it's super important. And yeah, we're stoked. I appreciate you guys doing the podcast. Quick plug: we also do a podcast. So if you wanna follow on our podcast, you can follow me on LinkedIn. So I post about that. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys helping get the mission out. And thanks for all the work.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, before we let you go, we have a few rapid fire questions for you. These are just
cool,
much more fun, answer in a sentence or less type of questions. So the first is the founder that you look up to most.
I really like Brian Armstrong. The reason for that is I heard a podcast when I was first starting the company. I started alone, and at the very beginning, I was sort of like, should I wait to find a co-founder? Should I try to find someone? And he had a similar experience where his co-founder dropped out of him the day after getting into Y Combinator. And the advice he gave was just like, keep building gravity and whatever happens is going to happen. And so I did that advice and I just sort of kept going. And I didn't let it stop me. So I think for that, Brian Armstrong is probably my favorite.
Are you a solo founder still? Or did you?
Still. Yes. But I've got an amazing team. They've been wonderful. And I obviously wouldn't be here without them.
Yeah. Well, I relate. My co-founder also dropped out like the second we signed a term sheet. I'm still the co-founder today. So anyway, we have that in common. Second question. What job would you want to have if you couldn't be a founder? It could be a fun one too. It doesn't have to be a serious thing.
Yeah.
Or it could be serious.
In my free time, I make music. So definitely be like a musician. I'd probably be that like poor musician on the side of the street trying to busk for money. That'd be me.
What's your vibe? What's your musician vibe?
The subway and street performers, the dancers.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite.
I've been making a lot of like house and techno these days. I live in New York, so I've kind of gotten into that scene, but I also have a soft spot for like indie and folk music.
What was your first entrepreneurial endeavor? It could be anything from like a first company idea, like a fun project you did in college, anything.
I worked on this app in college. I'm trying to even remember what it was. I think we were trying to make like a events app for college campuses, so you could see everything that was going on. I mean, it's like
everyone.
Yeah.
So I tried to start that too.
Yeah, it's everyone's first startup idea, which like obviously
it's like a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage. You work on it for 2 weeks,
Absolutely.
and you're like, here's why it's not going to work. So
If
that
you
might
only
have been
worked
the
on it for
first
2 weeks, that means you won. So
Totally.
I worked on mine.
I spent like 6 weeks on mine, so I was 3 times stupider than you were. So
I also interned for one. It was this company that came to campus, and I just that event that idea has circulated.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like on the list of ideas that are just like so bad, but everyone has. I remember using Sketch for the first time. This was like pre-Figma. I remember trying to learn Sketch to try to do the UI design for it. Man, long time ago.
yeah.
Wise. What was your first quote unquote real job?
I think my first job that I ever had was washing cars. I remember doing that in high school, which I guess would be kind of entrepreneurial too. But I remember I'd just wash all the cars in my neighborhood. And it would be, I grew up in Austin, Texas, so it was so hot in the summer. So I would just be out there like roasting in the sun, washing these cars. I don't miss that, but yeah.
And then the last one, what is a mega trend that you're excited about? It could relate to your company, your mental health industry, or just a consumer trend more broadly you're excited about.
This might also be my answer to the question of like, what's the contrarian idea that you believe in? But I actually, it's going to sound weird, but I'm actually happy that there is a mental health crisis going on right now. And I think it's a good thing for society because I think it's forcing us to invest in the infrastructure and the clinical developments to actually help people gain deeper insight and understanding into their lives. And I think this will be the first generation that has gone through mass therapy and has learned growth mindset, has learned mindfulness, has learned stress reduction techniques, has learned interpersonal effectiveness. And I think that's actually going to be a huge benefit for society as a whole, even though what it requires is people going through a really hard experience, which I'm obviously not stoked about. But that's, I think, a mega trend that come the end of my lifetime, I'll be curious to see how society is formed differently with many people having gone through a very hard experience and hopefully overcoming it.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. You can find us at somethingnewpod.com. You can follow Steph at Steph Moy, M-U-I, on Twitter. You can follow myself, Leeor, at LMushin on Twitter. Catch us again next time.
Cool. I thought it went well.